What are your overall thoughts on how the media has reported on quote-unquote Russiagate, the accusation that Russia has interfered in the 2016 election and might interfere in the 2020 election?
I think it's so farcical that I barely even read the reports. It's a joke. I mean, if there was any interference by the Russians, it's essentially undetectable. There are careful analyses of what happened in the elections. You can see how it changed, how the money poured in, all sorts of things. There's no sign of any Russian effect. Furthermore, it's just almost incredible from the beginning. I mean, what happened in the Senate and the House in 2016? Did the Russians interfere in the Senate elections? It went exactly the same way. Furthermore, the whole thing is a bad joke for all sorts of reasons. And for one thing, there are countries that do interfere in American elections, openly, publicly, forcefully. One of them even sent its prime minister to address a joint session of Congress to attack the initiative being taken by the sitting president. Is that interference? That was Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's only one part of it. I mean, that's large-scale, massive interference. Any other country did that, we'd have a huge scandal. Furthermore, does the U.S. interfere in elections? In Russia, for example? Yes, and proudly. In 1996, Clinton took pride in the fact that large-scale U.S. interference in the Russian election swung it to his favorite, Boris Yeltsin. The U.S. goes way beyond interfering in elections. It overthrows governments. I don't have to go through the history. So talk about Russian interference is simply a joke. Furthermore, the whole discussion is completely beside the point. There is massive interference in U.S. elections from the U.S. corporate sector, who pretty much buy the elections. There's extensive research. Tom Ferguson's is by far the best. It's very extensive, shows very convincingly that you can predict the outcome of an American election in Congress and executive with remarkable precision simply by looking at the single variable of campaign funding. And that's just the beginning. Ferguson's analysis goes right through 2016, includes Congress. This goes back a long time. Of course, it's picked up a lot under the opening of the floodgates by the reactionary Supreme Court, but it goes back to the 19th century. Is that interference in elections? And that's the bare beginning. Since the 1970s, when the neoliberal assault began, the number of lobbyists in Congress has just skyrocketed. A normal representative in Congress may spend several hours a day just talking to donors to try to get funds for the next election so he has a chance of running. Meanwhile, the lobbyists are meeting with his staff, bringing all of their huge resources, which of course overwhelm the staff, and pretty much writing the legislation. Is that interference with elections? I mean, what's being discussed is not even a joke. I mean, the election system is deeply corrupted right at its core in many ways.
Do you believe that Donald Trump colluded with the Russian government?
I haven't the slightest idea, and I don't care.
It isn't it important, though? I mean, the corporate media.
If there's going to be collusion, I think we can guess what it is. Maybe he made some deal to have a Trump hotel put up in Moscow. Okay, that's corrupt, but it's the kind of corruption that unfortunately is all over the place.
But with a quid pro quo of the Russians helping.
Of what? The quid pro quo is that he's increased military action on the Russian border. He's created a huge military expansion of the military budget aimed at Russia. He's pulled out of the INF Treaty, which is a major threat to Russia. What's the quid pro quo?
Again, it goes back to the accusation from the corporate media that Russia was, had social media trolls, that they released the emails that they possibly were working with WikiLeaks.
Yeah, but now we're back to the former question. There's no evidence of any Russian effect on the presidential election, certainly none on the Senate or House elections, which went exactly the same way, and there's no charge of Russian interference. And then the rest of the story that I just mentioned about actual interference. So it's not a serious charge. I mean, there's lots of things to condemn about Trump, but not that.